Hi everyone. So I was reading this post just now, like 5 minutes ago, about the fear of God. So my thoughts on it are a little bit muddled and not quite formed yet, but I thought I'd make a video about it just because I should be working out and then going to sleep for work tomorrow. But and instead of doing that, I'm going to try to do this. So without further ado, I'll just sort of get into it. I was reading this post, like I said, and it was about the fear of God. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how this is not something that I necessarily relate to anymore, which is kind of a recent thing for me. Like I mentioned before, I used to be Christian, and then I went through a period of atheism, and then I sort of started to get into paganism, and now my head is just a big jumbled mess of different spiritualities that I'm trying to piece through and understand. But back when I was a Christian, this fear of God was very much prevalent in my life, and I think for a lot of Christians' lives. And it's not something that's specific to Christianity, but I think specific to religions that teach about transcendent transcendent gods or solely transcendent gods. Whereas I think within a lot of pagan religions, um, there is this idea of a pantheist god. Not everyone has this thought, of course. There's going to be people who differ on this, people who will throw down on this if they feel like it. But I think a lot of pagans really identify with this idea of if not divinity being within everything and all of us, then at least being within the earth and being within nature, and being immanent and also transcendent in some ways, which I think I was going to say humanizes spirituality, but I think maybe that's not the right word. Maybe it's more like it familiarizes us with divinity in a way that we cannot be familiarized with it if it is specifically and solely transcendent, if it is otherworldly, if it's intangible in that way, because we can't feel it in a sensual kind of way, with our senses. Um, so there's that distance there, and I think specifically or solely transcendent deities, like within Christianity. And you see it even in um, older religions, even in like ancient Greek myths and the Norse mythologies. Um, and I think the difference there, because I know that some people will say, well, they identified like Freya, for example, with the sea, or Apollo with the sun, and that way they were very much nature deities. Um, but it's different from, I think, pantheistic pagan ideas and concepts, in that even though ancient Greek deities embodied these natural elements, I think that ancient Greeks still had this feeling as if things were happening to them, or as if these deities were doing things to them, instead of being involved in being part of the process of living. Do you get what I'm saying? Because I think when you look at pantheism, and when you feel that religion on a deep level, I think you understand that maybe there isn't this divine force that is having direct control over your life, but rather there is a flow to things. Things occur. They don't necessarily happen to, if that makes sense. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm like formulating my words correctly here, because this is just like brand new thoughts. Um, Whereas I think to transcendent deities, there's this idea that if you go through a famine, for example, or if you have a flood, there's this idea that you've done something to deserve it, or you've done something to anger that deity. And it's the same idea with hell. If someone goes to hell in Christian thought, they believe that, well, they deserve it because they were not following God's law. In religions where hell is not so much of a statement, something that is not necessarily totally formulated or as specific as, say, it is in Christianity. They find other ways of saying this by explaining away, like I said, famine or flood or disease. People who suffered diseases back during ancient Greece might say that, well, you've offended Apollo in some way, and you have to come to terms with that and try to gain his forgiveness. Whereas I think, I'm sort of talking in circles, but whereas I think that in pantheistic circles, when someone has an illness, when someone experiences something traumatic, I think people who are pantheistic see that as maybe part of the cycle, or I don't know how to explain that. It's different though. It's being part of something rather than having something happen to you. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly. Let me try again. I mean, if you're part of the process of living, then you have a hand in it just as much as nature has a hand in your life. You weren't separate from that violent act of nature. You are a part of it. You are, just as easily as nature can afflict something against you, you can afflict something against nature, and just as easily as nature can grant you something, you can grant something for nature, and it's this process of give and take. We are all a part of it. Whereas I think in other religions like Christianity and to an extent the ancient Greek religion, there is this idea that we're separate from it. We're man, we're sentient, we are somehow better than nature, and maybe therefore more vulnerable to it. It creates this dichotomy between them, between nature and man, as if there's this struggle, whereas I think in pantheistic circles, that struggle doesn't exist. Or if it exists, then it's maybe a little bit more blurry. The lines have been blurred, and it's no longer a struggle between man and nature, but between all things within nature against each other. But at the same time, nature works together. It's a very gray area as opposed to a black and white area, as I think some religions paint it to be. So I think if you guys were following my drift, it's kind of a complicated thing. It's difficult to totally mark out exactly what I'm saying. But I think that difference in ideology really affects how we view God and our reactions to God. Whereas I think in Christianity and within ancient Greek religions, there is this fear of God. I think in pantheism, there is an embrace of God, of divinity, because divinity is not outside of ourselves but within us, and because of that, we are part of it and part of the process, part of its decisions, its influence. Because I think if you view yourself as part of the process of the give and take, I think it's difficult to feel as if you've been attacked by it. And you begin to see yourself maybe less of a victim. You have more control over your life, I think, if you view it as a process, as, well, this happened, and so I had to do this to move on from it and continue the process, as opposed to, well, this happened, and it's because of this, and there's nothing I can do because I've been cursed, or because God is out to get me, or whatever it is. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of blame associated with some of these religions that are out there that I'm not really down with. And something that is really freeing to me recently is the sentence that I sometimes say where I'm like, because, like, okay, people talk about how we're all sinners, and it's like, I'm not a sinner. And I think that if people hear that, they think that, well, I'm saying that I'm perfect and I don't do anything wrong. And it's like, it's not that I don't do anything wrong, it's that I don't sin, which I think is a completely different concept of committing an act of evil or something like that. For example, people sometimes think that to have sex outside of marriage is a sin, and I just don't. I think that good and evil, right and wrong exists outside of what humans can always anticipate or correlate or understand. I certainly think that it exists outside of any kind of dichotomy such as good and evil or right and wrong. Anything, I think, can be, to an extent, can be right or wrong. It exists on a spectrum just as anything does. So in that way, I don't think that anything can specifically be said to be a sin. And when I say that I don't sin, I also mean that the things that I personally feel that I do that is wrong, that I realize and try to fix because I'm trying constantly to be a good person. But when I do mess up, I don't associate those mess ups with any sort of religious meaning or any sort of necessary religious persecution that I must undergo in order to cleanse myself of that that error of ways. So it's really freeing in that way. Because when I was a Christian, I used to be really influenced by this fear of God. I kind of keep going back to the Christian thing, and I think I might have mentioned this in the video, and I don't mean to do it to continue to like bash it. Like it's pretty much a dead horse with me at this point. But it is an experience that, or it's a religion that I have a lot of experience with, and so it's just easy to go back to that and use it as an example of things that I'm talking about in regards to things like that. So that's what I do. I'm not trying to convert anyone or say that it's always bad, because I've met a lot of really great people in Christianity, people who identify as Christian, and I just don't necessarily agree with their religious views, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think that they're any less for viewing them or having those views. So anyway, when I was younger, it had to have been 5 or 6 years ago. Gosh, that makes me feel old. Back when I was in high school, I think. I went to this church with my mom. It was during Easter time. And if you've ever been to a church in the South, they are terrifying places. They're basically glorified haunted houses filled with screaming, parcel tongue-speaking, crazy people. And people falling down the ground, and Southern conservatives, which is its own brand of terrifying. And anyway, so we went to this church, and they were throwing this sort of like play thing for Easter where they were reenacting the prophesied, is that a word? Prophesied. So it's the two consonant sounds around. But where they were reenacting the prophesied, that's the word. They were doing a play of what happened in Revelations. That's how I'll say it. And it was a really terrifying experience. It was dark and scary. There was this crazy evangelist lady who I'm like 90% certain if she met one of the Manson brothers would have come under their command with that cult thing that they had going on for them. And we went through it with her, so I had to deal with a lot of her little comments, which thankfully I blocked out of my head. But it was a really terrifying experience. It was really violent. There was fire all around. There was like dismembered body parts on the ground with blood, and I saw a few different people get sentenced to hell, and there was this one really terrifying scene, just like emotionally terrifying, where this woman woke up and her husband wasn't there, and she saw on the news that people were like disappearing and essentially being raptured, and she sort of had to come to terms with the realization that she wasn't good enough, and that she was essentially stuck on Earth to undergo torment and awfulness without any of her loved ones around. So that was sad. And once it was all over, I came home, immediately plopped myself on my bed, and just like prayed to God desperately to never let that happen to me, to never let me go to hell, and yeah. So it was just a really intense experience, and something that I've never experienced with deity since then. I just don't have that fear anymore. And I think part of the reason for that is, and I think the reason why you're seeing in religions like Christianity, where fear once was such a prevalent thing, it's sort of losing its power now, I think. I think people are starting to view the Christian God as being more loving, and more accepting and more open to new ideas, even though I don't necessarily think that kind of God is depicted in the Bible, and is not what the originators of those myths set out to create in divinity. If you can even say that people create divinity, I'm not sure. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah, like I said, I think you're seeing more and more that Christians are developing or redeveloping their God in a more loving kind of way, and I think that comes with the territory of us just being more technologically advanced and having a deeper understanding of not just the world, but the world's placement within the universe and how small we really are. I think that people who, like the originators of the Christian myths, the originators of the Judeo myths, of the ancient Greek myths, everyone who lived back then, who were creating these stories and developing these new ideas about religion, they had a very skewed perspective on themselves and where they were in relation to everything else, because they thought that the world was flat, and they thought essentially that the world was the universe, and they were the center of the universe, which I think elevated their sense of importance, which is, I don't think, quite so elevated nowadays. Certainly you'll find some people who their egos are still kind of in that ancient kind of mindset where they think that they are the center of the universe. But I think for most people, especially more people who are more science-minded, they understand that we're pretty insignificant in comparison to everything else. We're very, very small. Even the Earth is small compared to everything, and we're not even, we're just so small compared to the Earth. We're just small compared to everything else, which is probably small compared to everything else after that. And so I think in some ways this makes me question whether or not a God who created all of this could be equally caring for everyone, because everyone does not just mean everyone who's on Earth, but everyone who lives within all of existence, which could span, several galaxies and several planets. And it does make me question whether or not that's possible. But it also makes me doubt completely that this God would care so much to really be as strict, I think, on minor details as some of the previous incarnations of deity have been. Even in ancient Greek myths, you still see this interaction between humans and deity that is borderline obsessive, of the gods watching over the humans and monitoring their every movement and becoming insulted by something that a puny mortal would say about them, which just doesn't to me, that just doesn't seem like something that deity that spans universes and galaxies and planets. I mean, why would they care so much about something so small? And I see it in the same way for the Christian God. I mean, why would a God that spans so many light years of space care whether or not you had sex before marriage? It's so minuscule compared to everything else. So yeah, like I said, it makes me doubt that completely. Like, I don't even believe that a God would be that strict about such small things. Maybe larger things, I don't know. Maybe like murder and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, I think divinity is the thing is that if you believe that divinity is within all of us and within nature, then I think that things that harm us and that harm nature would, in some ways, harm deity. Not permanently, not in a way that is going to kill deity completely, because I don't think that would be possible if deity exists. But in ways that maybe make it sad. I think if divinity, like pantheists believe, is part of all of us, then it must feel us as part of itself, and because of that, care for us in a way. And so when you kill someone, or if you kill the planet, I think that affects it. It'll still bounce back, but for many years it could be in a period of mourning or healing. So yeah, that kind of brings me back from the depths of wondering whether or not divinity would even care at all about us. And I think that if you see it as being within all of us, then you can't help but see it as also caring for all of us, because we are part of it and essential to it in some ways. So that leads me to feeling a love from deity that I never felt in Christian religion, because I always saw myself then unconsciously or subconsciously as being a part of it. And by a part, I mean like separate from it, as opposed to being part of it, you know. So yeah, I mean that was like so jumbled and stupid, but hopefully you guys sort of got what I'm saying. I think, I don't even know if I explained all my thoughts, but real quick, like, because I don't think I talked about the fact that I'm seeing Christianity as becoming more loving, but I mean that's what it is. I see, to me, what it looks like to me is that people are turning from basic tenets of Christianity to create something that is more aligned with modern day beliefs about humanity and equal rights and social justice. And I'm on the fence about whether or not that's, I don't necessarily ever say that it was wrong, because I think myths change, and I think that they need to change in a lot of ways to be more, what is the word I'm looking for? To be more, yeah, I don't have it. To be more of an example, I guess, of what humanity now is going through, and the changes that we are making. Myths that have been created, a million years ago, or thousands of years ago, I guess I should say, they will still have kernels of what it means to be human, but there are going to be some significant changes between 5,000 years ago and now that need to become evident in our myths and in our cultural understanding and within our symbols. And that in so many ways needs to happen with Christianity. But at the same time, on the other hand, I feel like Christianity in the Bible is very specific about what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be a part of that religion. And I feel like if you're going to change it so much to where you are now accepting all the things that so much of this religion is saying that you shouldn't accept, then you might as well just call it something different. You know, why keep calling it the same thing if it's no longer the same thing? So, I don't know. I'm sure people have different views about that as well. And I'm more than happy to hear it if you guys want to leave me a comment or anything. But thank you guys for listening to me. I hope that some of that made sense. If not, maybe I should start writing down my thoughts for this. And then hopefully that will kind of organize it a little bit better. And maybe I won't say quite so much. But we'll see. I hope you guys have a wonderful night, though. I'm going to work out and then go to bed and then wake up and be sad because I have to go to work. Hopefully you guys don't have to go to work tomorrow. So, anyway, good night.